Ecumenism. Ecumenism was a Protestant movement that started in the mid-20th century. The goal was to foster collaboration among the different Christian religions. This resulted ultimately in the foundation of the World Council of Churches in 1948. Later, a similar movement was made toward non-Christian religions, and that was called interreligious dialogue. The word ecumenism comes from ecumenical, which means universal. And the word Catholic also means universal, as you know. But that word was already taken, and of course the Protestants didn't want to refer to them as Catholics, so they decided to use the word ecumenical instead. You might say that the Protestants were jealous of Catholic teaching, authority, and magisterium, and that's why they got together like this. They were jealous of the unity within the Catholic Church, that we only had one head, that we all followed that head, that we all believed in one thing, where the Protestants among themselves have many different heads, each one for their own group, and they all believe different things, as varied as how they interpret one passage in Scripture. So they wanted to find a way to get some sort of unity so that they could act as a group. They could be thought of as a group. They didn't have the same power as the Catholic Church had because of our unity. When this movement began, the Church wisely took no part. Pius XI said, "Such efforts can meet with no kind of approval among Catholics. They presuppose the erroneous view that all religions are more or less good and praiseworthy, inasmuch as they all give expression, under various forms, to the innate sense which leads men to God and to the obedient acknowledgement of His rule. Those who hold such a view are not only in error, they distort the true idea of religion and thus reject it, falling gradually into naturalism and atheism. To favor this opinion, therefore, and to encourage such undertakings is tantamount to abandoning the religion revealed by God." Our religion is the true religion. It was the only one founded by Christ. All the others were not. And therefore, if you feel that one religion is as good as another, then, or equally the same, that they all equally lead to God, and therefore are as good, one is as good as another, then you are abandoning the true religion. Since the Catholic Church is the only church founded by Christ and the sole possessor of the fullness of truth, again, this is Pius XI, the unity of Christians can only be reestablished by the conversion and the return to its bosom of its separated brethren. Such was the teaching of Pius XI in his encyclical Moralium Animus. Now, again, this flies in the face of religious liberty, that whole idea of religious liberty as well. And that's why ecumenism is an offshot of that, but it was addressed as well in the Council. The Church before the Vatican Council held that it wasn't up to us to change, but those who are separated from it. In other words, we don't give up what we have and go over to them. They should come to us because we are the true. We have the truth. They have error. The Church was always ready to facilitate their return, but never at the expense of the faith, never giving up one iota of what we believe. At Vatican II, the Church adopted a new attitude, corresponding with a new doctrine. The Catholic Church is no longer presented as a unique religious society leading to salvation, the only one leading to salvation. The other Christian confessions and even the non-Christian religions are considered as other expressions, undoubtedly less perfect, but nonetheless valid, of the divine religion, paths really leading to God and eternal salvation. In other words, you can get to heaven. The whole idea of outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation goes to the wayside. These religions can also lead you to heaven. They're a less perfect way to heaven, but they can also get you there. That's what comes out of the Vatican Council. It's no longer a question of the conversion of non-Catholics to Catholicism, but a dialogue of religious pluralism. Vatican II issued a document called Lumen Gentium, which says that the Catholic Church subsists in. The Catholic Church, not that the Catholic Church is the Church of Christ, but that the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church. That the two are not equal, not one and the same, but we are part of the Church. The Catholic Church is part of the Church of Christ, but leaves room for others to be as well. In traditional theology, the term Catholic Church and Church of Christ are one and the same. By using the expression subsisted in, the Vatican posits a distinction between the two. That the two no longer are equal, one and the same. They are separate ideas. Vatican II is willing to say that the Catholic Church has its perfect realization in the Church of Christ has its perfect realization in the Catholic Church, but conveys the idea that it's not identical to the Catholic Church. The Church of Christ would extend beyond it imperfectly through elements of the Church present in other Christian religions. In other words, if other Christian religions have some of the things that the Catholic Church has, all those elements allow it to connect to us in some way, and therefore be part of the Catholic Church. The Vatican Council was trying to harmonize two doctrinal statements. The first one, that the Church of Christ, despite the divisions among Christians, continues to exist fully in the Catholic Church. In other words, they were still holding to that doctrine that the Catholic Church and the Church of Christ are one and the same, or at least that the Catholic Church is the fullness of the Church of Christ. But at the same time, they also wanted to introduce this idea that other elements could be found that sanctify, that give sanctification and truth. Or in other words, that the Catholic Church might be the fullest and most perfect way of achieving sanctification, but you could get to heaven through other churches as well. The Church has always taught dogmatically that outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation. So to be saved, it's necessary to belong to the Church, either in reality, by submission to its three conditions. There are, of course, three conditions to which you have to submit to be a member of the Catholic Church. You have to be baptized. You have to accept the whole of the Catholic Church, in other words, not be a heretic, and you have to submit to its hierarchy, in other words, not be a schismatic. Schism and apostasy or heresy will put you outside the Catholic Church. So you have to have those three things, those three conditions are necessary to be a Catholic: baptism, Catholic faith, and submission to hierarchy. Or at least by desire, explicit or implicit. So consequently, those who don't have the Catholic faith, or who are not submissive to the hierarchy, or who are not even by implicit desire want to belong to the church or to change their state, cannot secure their salvation with these dispositions. The council tried to find intermediate states between belonging to the church and not belonging to it. She wanted all those schismatics and heretics to be part of the church. The non-Catholics would be imperfect communion with the church, or related in various ways to the people of God. This implies that they could be confident of their salvation without having the desire to be part of the church, even implicit desire, of changing their state and becoming a member of the church. So they don't have to have even the desire. They could still get to heaven, clinging to all the tenets of their own religion. Although it's true that some Protestants do hold sacred scripture, and these are the elements that we're talking about, sacraments and scripture, things that we have in common with the Protestants or schismatics. So it's true that some Protestants do hold with sacred scripture, more or less altered, and some Eastern schismatics do conserve the sacraments. But traditional theologians in the past didn't regard these as elements of sanctification, but rather as vestiges of the true religion. They weren't living part. To be an element of sanctification, they would have to be living, dynamic. They would have to be able to give grace. But theologians of the past said they weren't that. They were vestiges. They were ruins. They were hollow shells with nothing living inside them. Vestiges means that although stolen from the Catholic Church by separated communities, they cease to be a living reality. They become ruins. They no longer give grace. So how then can they sanctify? Well, what about baptism? Is it valid? Here we have to distinguish between a valid sacrament and a fruitful sacrament. A sacrament can be valid without being fruitful. That is, without giving grace. A fruitful sacrament gives grace. A sacrament can be valid but not give grace. For example, if you receive the sacrament of matrimony in mortal sin, the sacrament is valid. You are truly married to that person. But you get no grace from the sacrament because you're in mortal sin. And you also commit a second sin, mortal sin, of sacrilege. And so therefore that sacrament is valid but not fruitful. It remains unfruitful until such time as you renounce the sin. You go to confession and you are forgiven that mortal sin and the sin of sacrilege. And once you're back in the state of grace, now the graces of the sacrament can flow to you. But as long as you're in the state of mortal sin, the sacrament remains unfruitful. So how does this apply to other religions? Adherence to heresy is, per se, an impediment to grace. To be a heretic is to be outside the Catholic Church, is to be in mortal sin. It implies that a sacred reality, a sacrament, holy in itself, cannot be an element of holiness. If you are in mortal sin, how can you receive a sacrament, but it won't give you grace? to a community. So it can't be an element of holiness to a community separated from the Catholic Church. The community itself is the impediment. It's because the heresy that that community has as a group, and you are now a member of that group, as long as you adhere to what that religious congregation believes, you are a heretic, you are in mortal sin. To some, the sacraments outside the church may be both valid and fruitful. For example, a child under the age of reason who receives the sacrament of baptism in a heretical church, in a Protestant church, for them it would be both valid and fruitful, because they are not capable at this point of committing a mortal sin, of understanding that the schism, of understanding the heresy that they are committing to, that they are committed to. So if they die having received the Protestant baptism, yes, the baptism for them is fruitful and valid. Also, people who have what we call invincible ignorance, they're mentally incapable. They're retarded mentally. They are maybe have a mental condition, insanity, whatever. In their cases, they are not capable of understanding or that they are heretics, then, or that what they're believing is heretical, then it doesn't apply to them. For them, the sacrament will be valid and fruitful. Because they're incapable of grasping the heresy that they're steeped in. But to others, the sacraments would be possibly valid if they were done correctly, but unfruitful, until such time as they renounce their heresy or schism and return to the church. Just as with matrimony, the person renounces his mortal sin in confession and returns to the church, the same with them. When they renounce it and return to the church, then the grace again flows into the soul. The Vatican Council did not single out only Protestant churches, but in the Declaration Nostra Aetate, it embraces non-Christian religions as well. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Freemasonry, the whole gamut. No longer does the church work to convert and evangelize pagan religions, but now she seeks dialogue with them. And so you have Assisi and the Pachamama. Such dialogue can lead only to one conclusion. If the Catholics work with the non-Catholics in search of truth, and the question is of reciprocal enrichment, clearly the Church has abandoned any claim that she alone possesses the truth. If we are working with these churches that they can enrich us and we can enrich them, then we are no longer holding with the doctrine that we alone have the truth. Otherwise, why would we? What could we expect to gain from them? Non-Catholic religions are not a means of salvation, but rather perdition. Certainly, the members of false religions can be saved in them. Stress the word in. They can be saved in their religion if, leading heedful of their consciences and striving to fulfill the will of God insofar as they know it, they receive from God the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. But God alone knows when that happens. We can only say that one may be able to be saved in a false religion, or rather, despite it, but never by means of it. Think about that. Let me repeat. We can only say that one may be able to be saved in a false religion, or rather despite them, but never by means of them.